Welcome to the Scientific Worldview, the podcast dedicated to exploring the big questions in science and philosophy. I am Daniel Gambacorta.
I'm Atana Shannon.
Atana, let's talk social psychology.
Let's talk it.
This is the psychology of how we affect the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of other people.
How do we?
Have you taken a social psychology class?
Yes.
Okay, how was it?
I really enjoyed it. I would say it's because of the professor, but also I'm a sociology person, so which is very similar.
Yeah, I think it's one of the more broadly interesting areas of psychology.
Yeah, I agree.
One example of a social psychological effect, the spotlight effect. The tendency to think that more people notice something about you than they really do. There was a study in which a participant is assigned to wear a Barry Manilow t-shirt. This is a point in time when Barry Manilow is very uncool. Do you know Barry Manilow?
No.
Okay, he's a singer.
Okay.
And if you were a college student, it would be unusual for you to be into Barry Manilow. He's not a cool musician at this point in time. So one student is wearing the shirt. They have a conversation with other participants in the lab. After they have the conversation, the experimenter asks the participant who's wearing the shirt, how many of the other participants do you think noticed that you were wearing that shirt? And they guessed on average something like 50%. And then the experimenter asked the other participants, hey, did you notice that one guy was wearing a Barry Manilow shirt? And only something like 25% even noticed it. And then we have this control condition where somebody watches the conversation go on via video. They're like watching a live stream essentially. And they had to guess, how many people do you think would have noticed that one guy's wearing a Barry Manilow shirt? And they correctly guessed 25%. So this all goes to say, whoever's wearing the shirt, they're wearing this embarrassing shirt. They feel like, surely other people can tell. People are noticing that I'm wearing this desperately uncool shirt, but way fewer are noticing than they actually think.
That bolsters my confidence a little
Yes.
bit.
So this is a bit of social psychology that, yeah, maybe it could give you some comfort, or maybe not. But the punchline is people notice you less than you think.
Right. Exactly.
So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you want to be noticed more, but
I want to be invisible,
yeah, I
personally.
think plenty of people, maybe they're insecure about something and they're like, oh, other people notice this thing about me. And it's like, probably most people don't even notice it
Right.
because they're too busy like thinking about themselves and how they're coming off.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Post-decisional dissonance. After making a decision, people become more confident in their choice. You want to hear about a study?
Always.
There was a study in which the experimenter goes to a horse racing track. People bet on the horses. The experimenter goes to the line where people go to bet on their horse. So people are about to place their bets, and the experimenter would ask people, what do you think is the chance your horse is going to win? Do this many times. Then the experimenter comes back another time, and right after people place their bet, ask them, what do you think the chances your horse is going to win? People will give a higher chance of their horse winning right after they bet compared to right before they bet.
That somewhat reminds me of another form of cognitive dissonance. I think we talked about in another episode with the study of receiving money after something that was like a really boring activity, and people would rate the activity as more pleasant after they received the money.
In this case, it seems like before somebody locks in a decision, They're considering whether it's the best decision. Maybe
Mhm.
I should bet on a different horse. But then after it's locked in, they switch over to rationalizing why it was the best decision.
Yeah, I think I've done that for sure.
You see the same thing in politics. Right after people vote for their candidate, they're more confident that candidate's going to win.
That's interesting. I do the same thing, but I also will look up things on social media, which is not a healthy idea, but look up things that will support my stance. If I buy something that I'm like unsure about, I want to look it up and like see all the 5-star reviews and be like, oh yeah, I got the right thing.
Sure, confirmation bias.
Yeah, which I willingly participate in, I guess.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I definitely notice it in myself. Sour grapes. After failing to attain something previously desired, rationalizing it's not so desirable after all. You know, the parable of the fox and the grapes.
I don't think so.
Okay, here's a poem version.
Okay.
This fox has a longing for grapes. He jumps, but the bunch still escapes. So he goes away sour, and 'tis said to this hour, declares that he's no taste for grapes. So our fox wanted these grapes, couldn't reach them, and then said, those grapes are probably sour anyway.
I don't want those grapes anyway.
Yeah. You might see this if somebody applies for a job and they're applying because they want the job. And then they don't get the job. And then they say, that wouldn't have been a good job anyway.
I don't want that job anyways.
Yeah, it is sour grapes.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about conformity. One of the most influential studies in psychology was Ash's conformity study. I'm sure you are familiar with it.
Yes, very.
In this study, we have one real participant and a number of confederates. The confederates are actors. They are pretending to be participants, but they are in cahoots with the experimenter. They're just following a script. The task for participants is to say which of three comparison lines is the same length as some standard line. So you get a line and you compare three other lines to it and you say, okay, which of these comparison lines is the same length? And it's meant to be a very easy task. It's just matching the length of lines.
Right.
And indeed, there's a condition in which participants just do this, by themselves, or they don't get any feedback from anybody else, and they get it right almost every time. It's meant to be easy.
Yeah.
But here is the trick of the study. Participants would give their answer out loud, the Confederates and the participant. And Ash would first call on a bunch of Confederates, and they would all give the same wrong answer. So you have three lines, A, B, and C. Let's say that B is the correct answer. Ash calls on the first Confederate. First Confederate says C. Go to the next one, they say C. Go to the next one, they say C. So 9 Confederates have said C. And then it comes around to the real participant. Will they give the obvious correct answer of B, or will they conform, go with the group, and say C?
They're going to go see.
Ash found that the vast majority of participants at some point in the study would conform. He did several trials where you're comparing the lengths of lines, and at some point, most people will conform. Now, there is a rational reason to conform. It could be that, hey, if 9 people are giving this answer, maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me, like I'm just not seeing it as clearly as other people. So it's not necessarily a mistake to be influenced by others' judgments, but there was a version of the study in which participants either got to hear the judgment of Confederates or the judgment of a computer program who is doing the same task. It's also trying to match up the lengths of the lines. And the participants judged the Confederates and the computer program to be equally accurate. Despite this, people conformed more when the incorrect judgments were provided by the human Confederates compared to the program.
Oh, wow. They don't trust the program as much as the Confederates, the humans.
Well, I think the best way to interpret this is it's not just about trusting others' judgment, it's conformity for
Mhm.
the sake of conformity.
Okay. That
It's
makes
I
sense.
don't want to be the one who's giving a different answer.
Yeah. And then a computer, they don't make emotional judgments about you.
Right, exactly. You don't care what the computer program thinks of you. It's not thinking
Yeah.
anything of you. So it's not just about wanting to be accurate, it's about wanting to conform.
Right.
You see the same thing with politics. There's like a political version of this where people give a political opinion or they express whether they agree or disagree with a political opinion, such as free speech being a privilege rather than a right. It is proper for a society to suspend free speech whenever it feels itself threatened. We have the same kind of setup where you get a bunch of Confederates. They're going to say, whether they agree with this or not, and they're all going to give the same answer. Maybe they all agree,
Right.
maybe they all disagree. And then it comes around to the real participant, they're more likely to go with the group. If you just
That's
heard
interesting.
everyone, express their view on free speech, you're more likely to go with them compared to if you were just asked that question in isolation.
Right.
So we're sheep.
We're sheep, sheeple.
Eh, I say. All right, let's talk compliance. How do people get us to say yes? What are the techniques people use to get us to comply, to buy stuff, to donate to their charity? What are the psychological tricks?
Lagos, pathos, and ethos.
So those are elements of a persuasive message. It's the idea you're getting at.
Yeah, I think that's how I learned how to do persuasive writing and speaking.
I'm going to talk about particular tricks one may use.
All right, I'm going to use them
Here's a
in my daily
trick.
life.
The foot in the door technique. This increases compliance with a large request by first getting compliance with a smaller, related request. If you could get somebody to do something small, they're more likely to be willing to do something big. For example, there was a study, and this took place a while ago. Women are cold called on the phone, and they're asked, would you let a team of men come into your home and rummage through your household items to catalog your household items? Can you guess what most women said?
No.
No. Most women said no. Different condition. Women are cold called. They're asked, would you be willing to participate in a phone survey about the items in your home? Some women say yes. And then you call them back a week later and give them the large request. You say, would you let this team of men come into your home and catalog your household items? And now most of those women said yes.
That's interesting. I wonder why.
Because they got their foot in the door.
Yeah, I would still say no, personally.
Also, this study was done decades ago. So the culture was different, I suppose. But
Yeah.
point is, if you get somebody to do something small, they're more likely to be willing to do something big.
Yeah. I think salesmen use that technique sometimes too.
Sure, sure.
Like, can I have a glass of water? Oh, can I come in for a second? Oh, can you buy this vacuum from me?
Yeah. It's like you gave me the water.
Right?
Now you got to buy the vacuum. The door in the face technique. This increases compliance by beginning with a large favor, likely to be rejected, and then retreating to a more moderate favor. So this is kind of the reverse. You start with something big and you expect them to say no, but then you ask for something smaller and it makes them feel like, I should at least be willing to do this small thing.
Right.
I got my PhD from New Mexico State. After I graduated, they call me and they say, would you be willing to donate $100 to New Mexico State? And I said no. And they said, okay, would you be willing to donate $50 to New Mexico State? And I said no. And they said, all right, all right. But would you at least be willing to donate $20 to New Mexico State?
Oh my goodness.
And I said no. But they were using this door in the face technique.
Right.
Like, okay, you weren't willing to donate 100, but come on. You have $20.
I gave all my $20 to my university. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I already paid you guys.
I already paid you so much more than $120.
Yeah. The low ball technique, gaining a commitment to an arrangement, then raising the cost of carrying out the arrangement. You get somebody to commit to something, and then at the very end, you raise the cost, but people are already committed. It's too late, so they just go along with it. You ever use DoorDash?
Yes.
Or something similar?
Yeah.
DoorDash uses this technique. DoorDash makes money when you use the app. So they want you to use the app as much as possible. One determinant of whether you use the app is how much time the food is going to take to get to you. If the food is going to get to you quickly, you're more likely to use the app. So when you're scrolling through restaurants, it will give you an estimate of how long the food is going to take to get to you. So it gives you some estimate. You choose the restaurant, you choose what you want, you make your customizations, you get to that final screen, and it gives you an updated estimate for how long it's going to take the food to get to you.
And it's longer.
And it's always longer. That updated estimate is always longer. They're using the lowball technique. They are getting you in the door by giving you a lower estimate.
Yes.
Are they lying? Yeah. So they're giving you a low estimate in order to get you to click on a restaurant and place your order. Then they'll give you a realistic estimate once you get to the payment screen. But guess what?
And it's like 15 minutes more.
Guess what? Yeah. By that time, it's too late because you picked your restaurant, you picked what you wanted, you made your customizations. Are you really going to go back and do all that again just because it's going to take 15 minutes longer?
Sometimes I do, but yeah, I see the point.
But that's like what they're banking on. Yeah, that's what they're banking on.
Or they don't tell you how much the like extra fees are until the very end too. You're like, oh, it's only this much per restaurant, but then there's all these extra DoorDash fees.
Right. Yeah, that's another really good example. That's a common trick that businesses use is like split up the price, but then only show you like one component of the price. And then at the very end, they're like, oh, and there's this fee and this fee and this fee.
Yes, and then it adds up to like $30 more than you were expecting.
Yeah. DoorDash also uses anchoring, which is not really a persuasion technique, but we talked about anchoring in our episode on cognitive bias. Anchoring is you put a number in somebody's head, and then when they generate a number, they use your number as an anchor. And so the number that they generate is going to be closer to the number that you gave than it would had you not given a number. So that was a very abstract explanation, but this is what DoorDash does. You get to the final screen and it asks you how much you want to tip. And it's not just a blank field, right?
Right.
They suggest a tip. They suggest a tip, and they don't suggest a normal tip, do they?
No, never.
They suggest a very high tip.
It's always, I mean, I did DoorDash, so I understand that like you want the higher tip, but also it's like very high sometimes.
They want you to tip more because then they have to pay their employees less.
They don't pay their employees very well.
The more people tip, the less DoorDash has to pay and still have people willing to do the job. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they want you to tip as much as possible.
Yeah.
So they will give you an anchor. They'll say like, oh, you should tip, 35%. And most people wouldn't naturally tip that high. So you go and you change the default value that's there, but whatever you change it to is probably higher than what you would have put in had you not seen that 35% anchor.
Right. They have options for you to lower it. Sometimes you can press other if you really don't want to tip someone, but I use their anchoring. I fall
Mm-hmm.
victim.
Ahoy, matey. The bait and switch technique. You get commitment to an arrangement, and then you make the arrangement unavailable or unappealing, and you offer a more costly arrangement. For instance, maybe a used car dealership, they put out a commercial where they say, oh, we have this great car at a great price, and you want to buy a car. So you go to the dealership, and when you get there, they say, uh-oh, we're out of that car, but we have these other more expensive cars. So that's a bait and switch because they bait you with the, attractive car, and then they switch it up once you're there. They're banking on you being committed to buying a car. Like you went out that day to buy a car. So even if the precise car you're looking for isn't available, there's a good chance you're going to be open to looking at other cars.
Right.
Let's talk obedience.
Let's talk about it.
I know you know Stanley Milgram, the Milgram
I talk
study.
about it all the time.
Do you?
I really do. And I think I'm educating my fellow lay people in the Milgram experiments.
This is maybe the most famous study in psychology. Certainly it's up there. This is a study of obedience. We got one real participant, we got one Confederate. They come to a lab. They are assigned roles. The participant is going to ask questions to the Confederate. Every time the Confederate gets a question wrong, the participant needs to flip a switch on this large metal apparatus, and by flipping a switch, they're told it's going to deliver an electric shock. And we want to see what's the effect of these electric shocks on the participants or the Confederates' ability to learn and remember. Now, no shocks are actually delivered, but the participant will hear the Confederate, yell out in pain and complain about the shocks that are going on. So they believe that they're delivering shocks, although no shocks are actually delivered. The way that this apparatus is set up, it's this long line of switches, and there's a number above each switch that supposedly indicates the voltage of the shock. And the voltage increases with every switch. At the very end, the final switch is just labeled XXX as if to indicate that, this is a very high level of shock. The study begins. The Confederate is an actor, so they're just intentionally getting questions wrong. And then the experimenter says, all right, you got to flip that next switch. They flip the switch. They will hear the Confederate in the other room, yell out in pain. Study continues. The Confederate keeps getting questions wrong. Eventually, the Confederate will say, get me out of here. They get very agitated. They're yelling, you got to get me out of here. I have a heart condition. I can't continue. You got to get me out of here. The experimenter says, all right, flip that next switch. If at any point the participant objects and says, maybe we should stop, the experimenter will say something like, for the sake of the experiment, you have to continue. This goes on. Eventually, if the participant is still flipping switches, the Confederate will stop responding altogether, as if maybe they've had some kind of health emergency. It's not clear. They're just giving no feedback whatsoever. And then the experimental will say, well, no response is an incorrect response. You got to flip that next switch. And then if they keep going, the experimental will have them flip that XXX switch 3 times before ending the experiment. Milgram, before he performed the experiment, he asked people working in psychology, what percent of participants do you think would go all the way to the end? They'll keep delivering shocks, even though the Confederate has very explicitly said, I no longer consent. I have a heart condition. We should stop. Even after the Confederate stops responding altogether. What percent of participants do you think would go all the way to the end? The average estimate that people gave was less than 1%. In that first study, he found that about 2/3 of people went all the way to the end.
That's so many too. That always, this is one of the scariest psychological experiments, in my opinion, just because of the sheer amount of people that actually did follow through.
This study has been replicated. There's a version of this that was done on a puppy
That's worse.
where they have people shock a puppy. And in this version, the puppy was actually shocked, but it was a very low level of shock. So the
Okay.
thought is it's not hurting the puppy, but even if you like give a puppy a little jolt, it's still gonna like go nuts, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, you basically you find the same thing.
No, I thought we weren't allowed to do that anymore. We talked a lot about that study with ethics and how we're not allowed to use like deception in studies unless it's very, very controlled and understood well why we need to use deception.
That is the ethical standard in psychology. Don't use deception unless you absolutely have to. The other concern in the Milgram experiment is people are doing things that they may, upon reflection, think is unethical. And so you're kind of pressuring people to do this thing that is bad, like, hurting
Yeah,
someone, not consent to be in the study. And maybe this has some kind of enduring psychological effect on them.
that feels like it could cause some trauma, maybe.
It's a consideration.
Yeah.
But as for explanation, what is going on here? The standard explanation is you got Milgram. He's a scientist. He's in his lab coat. He's telling you, flip the next switch. So you feel like I'm just following orders. And if anything bad happens, it's not my fault. It's the fault of this authority figure who's supposed to be in control.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you're still the one flipping the switches, but I do see the point.
Just in terms of what's going on psychologically,
Yeah, that
like
makes sense.
why are most people going all the way to the end? And you can see a video of this on YouTube if you just like search for a Milgram experiment. If someone thinks that, well, maybe people don't believe that this is real. If you watch the video, participants get quite agitated.
They do. They definitely were deceived.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Group polarization. If you put people who agree on some topic together in a group and have them discuss it, they will end up with more extreme views than they started with. They will polarize. For example, let's say you get a bunch of people and they somewhat support raising the minimum wage. They're like,
Right.
yeah, sure, let's do it. If you have them all have a discussion about the minimum wage, at the end of that discussion, they will strongly support raising the minimum wage. So they'll have a more extreme version of the view that they came in with.
So it's like we're not only going to raise the minimum wage, we're going to raise it by $10.
Something like that. Or there was a version with global warming. You get a bunch of people and they're like, yeah, I guess it's a concern. You put them in a group, they talk about it, and they're like, well, now I think it's a very important concern.
Yeah, makes sense.
If you put people in a group who are all leaning in one direction and they're talking about that issue, they are disproportionately going to hear arguments in favor of whatever position people already have. So, like, if you're in a room with people who somewhat support raising the minimum wage and they talk about it, you're going to hear a lot of arguments for raising the minimum wage, some of which you might not have heard before. You're probably not going to hear as many arguments against raising the minimum wage.
Right. Because everybody is sort of leaning towards,
Right.
yeah.
So you walk in with an opinion, now you're going to be exposed to more arguments that bolster that opinion. So that's one reason why we see group polarization. Another reason is if everybody seems to agree on a thing, you don't want to be the odd man out. So if people are starting to lean towards this is really important, you're like, I also think it's really important.
Kind of back to what we were talking about,
Yeah.
conformity.
Yeah, there's a conformity effect going on.
Yeah,
And perhaps this can help us understand political dynamics on social media. So like
absolutely.
you tend to be in your little echo chamber of people who agree with you politically, and then you're basically only hearing arguments for your side, right?
Right. Especially if it's like something that's kind of widely held on the platform. I'm trying to think of an example, but I'm blanking. But a majority of the platform holds a similar viewpoint or a similar idea. And then the entire platform starts to be, at least in your algorithm of it, about that specific phenomena. And your opinions become more and more polarized.
Mm-hmm.
I guess like family vlogging. A lot of people are against family vlogging. And so a large portion of the platform is against family vlogging, and you hear videos about it, and then you hear creators making other videos about those videos, about those videos, and it's a whole rabbit hole of people hating on family vlogging.
Is family vlogging just I take a video of me like having fun with my family?
Yes and no. It's kind of just like um making videos with your whole family
Mm-hmm.
participating, but they're very like structured, scripted. It's almost like work content creation.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So is there a concern that like there's children involved, it's going
Yeah.
on the internet permanently, they're kind of being pressured into doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And then like the exploitation of possibly of your children because maybe they're not receiving the income that you make off of those videos because they're children. And who knows if they will ever see it. And there's a whole thing about it. There was a case recently this year, like a court case about it, which is why that came to mind.
Okay. Well, I don't want to go too far afield, but I also kind of do. What was the court case? Like what was the crime?
um, well, the woman was like abusing her children off
Okay.
camera.
Oh, okay,
So like
that's a different thing.
yeah. But she was a family vlogger, so that's why it
Okay,
kind of,
okay.
I guess, came to light.
Moving on. We talked about social status previously from an evolutionary perspective. We talked about prestige and dominance and status in animals. Now let's talk about status from a cultural perspective.
Let's talk about it.
Status has to be understood at the level of the group. Status is a way of organizing groups to be more effective. Like an army cannot be made entirely of generals. Now, you need leaders, you need people who will defer to those leaders. There's studies where groups of participants, they're given some tasks, and some groups perform better than others. The groups that perform well quickly form a hierarchy. They determine who's going to do what, who's giving orders, who's taking orders. And then there's other groups where everyone is jockeying to be the leader and they're arguing over, status essentially, and those groups don't perform as well. So that's an important component of status, an important way of understanding status is it's this coordination mechanism.
Right. That feels natural in a way.
One way we gain status is through affiliation. We try to affiliate with high status people, prestigious institutions, winning teams, cool brands. Somebody might post a picture of themselves on social media. It's them, they're hanging out with a celebrity. And a function of this is to signal, I am so cool. This very cool person was willing to spend time with me, so I am cool by association. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Or, if somebody graduates from Harvard, they put the Harvard bumper sticker on their car, so you know that they are affiliated with this prestigious institution.
They are smart by affiliation.
In the same vein, we distance ourselves from low status people, low status events, so that the low status doesn't rub off on us. There was a study in Belgium of people putting political signs in their window. So right before an election, maybe you support a candidate, so you put a sign uh, displaying your support for that candidate in the window. Does that make
Right.
sense?
We kind of do that with yard signs in the
Yeah,
US.
sure. After the election happens, if somebody was supporting the winning party, and they put a sign in their window to indicate this, 60% of those people kept the sign up. Whereas if somebody was supporting the losing party, only 19% of those people kept the sign in their window.
Yeah, you lost. Get that sign out of here.
Yeah. So it's like, no, I didn't support them.
I don't know what you're talking
I didn't
about.
support the loser.
Yeah.
Next, let's talk about some puzzles of social status, some mysterious observations, and then we'll talk about some possible explanations. You ready for
Let's
some
hear it.
puzzles?
Do tell.
Here's a puzzle. It is generally not socially acceptable to do things for the sake of status. You're supposed to have some other reason for why you're doing what you're doing, and then you just kind of happen to get status as a side effect.
Right.
An aspiring actor moves to Los Angeles. You ask them, why do you want to be an actor? And they say, oh, it allows me to express myself authentically, and I love the art form, and it's a way to be creative. Now, it seems pretty obvious. If you go to LA to be an actor, you want fame, right? You want to be famous. That's the job you would take if you want to be famous. A lot of people want to be
Right.
famous, but you're not supposed to emphasize that. You're not supposed to, it's like, why did you go out to LA? Because I want to be famous. You're not supposed to say that.
Right. It's like the same way a lot of people move out to LA and become influencers because they want to express themselves online.
Sure,
But they're
sure.
also famous people now.
So you want the status, you want the fame, but you're not supposed to emphasize that.
Right.
All right, so we're just going to keep that in mind. Another puzzle. Bragging is often considered gauche or uncouth. If you meet someone for the first time and they just list all the amazing things about them and their accomplishments, it'd be pretty strange and like even off-putting. But people humble brag all the time. Humble bragging is bragging, but you make it seem like you're not trying to brag.
Yeah.
So
Guilty.
I'll explain that a little bit. There's a lot of humble bragging on social media. The late comedian Harris Whittles had a Twitter account where he would repost humble brag tweets. So here's one. This is from costume director Somer Terry. Quote, why does the Mercedes dealership always have fresh baked hot cookies? Don't they understand how mean that is? End quote. So ostensibly, this tweet is a complaint about the presence of cookies, but one may surmise the true intention of the tweet is to brag about how she's getting a Mercedes, and apparently she visits the dealership a lot because she's like, oh, they always have cookies here. So she's like bragging about getting this expensive luxury vehicle.
Yeah, exactly.
A stereotypical sort of example is somebody posts a picture on social media and they're like, look at this cute dog. But the picture isn't just the dog. It's them with the dog and they look really good in the picture. So again, ostensibly, the purpose of posting the picture is to show off the dog, but we may deduce the real reason they posted it is because they look really good and they want to show off how beautiful they are.
You're so beautiful if you do that, but I'm looking at your dog. I can think of a third example of somebody who's posted this happened on social media about how hard it is to keep up with all of their brand deals. And
yes, perfect.
this is a complaint about, oh, I work so hard as an influencer and I just can't keep up with all these people that are paying me and sending me all of these free products.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, this humble bragging is mysterious at first glance because it seems inefficient. It's doing the same thing as bragging, just with extra steps. So we want to show off things about ourselves to, potential friends and mates and people we just want to impress. People want to be able to evaluate us. So you could just plainly say what is so great about you. And that's what bragging is. But that is not socially acceptable. You can't post a picture and just be like, look how beautiful I am.
Look at me, I'm so beautiful.
Even though that's
You
the
can.
subtext. It is gauche and uncouth, I dare say.
I agree.
So we do this weird inefficient thing where, we show off things about ourselves, but like we pretend that we're not. We brag, but we like pretend that we're not bragging.
Right.
Okay, here's another puzzle. A man and a woman go on a date. Women prefer wealthy mates. The man knows this. The man would like to display his wealth as so to be perceived as more attractive. He figures there's no more accurate way to show how wealthy you are than to bring your date to an ATM and show him your bank balance. Right? That would very credibly communicate precisely how wealthy he is. And you might think if he has a lot of money in the bank, that would make him more attractive, but there's something a bit tacky about this, isn't there?
Yeah,
It's tacky.
it's tacky. Don't do that.
So it is weird and tacky to bring your date to an ATM, but engaging in conspicuous consumption is considered acceptable. So conspicuous consumption, buying expensive things to show off how wealthy you are. So maybe you buy this really expensive car, and obviously you don't need a Ferrari to get from point A to point B, but you spend a lot of money on the car. It's a way of showing off, if I'm able to waste this much money on a car, I must be very wealthy. So the
Right.
idea is you buy this really expensive stuff, and then your date just so happens to see that you have a Ferrari, and that credibly communicates how wealthy you are. Now, again, this is a kind of inefficient way to communicate information. I mean, if you bring your date to the ATM's not lying. I mean, you are that wealthy, but instead of doing the straightforward, credible thing, you have to buy a useless thing, and then your date just so happens to see you have this thing that's like way more expensive than what anybody needs. And then that is supposed to convey your wealth in a socially acceptable way.
Yeah. Maybe it's, I don't know. I was going to say maybe it's because you're not seeing the exact dollar sign amount unless you Google it because you're dedicated. Like with conspicuous consumption, or you tell somebody, you could like say that you are well off without exact amounts, maybe.
So you think people don't like knowing exact amounts.
Yeah, like you're wealthy, but they don't want to know how wealthy.
All right. I mean, you're a woman, so I'm not gonna defy you on this. If you think that is female psychology, that women prefer wealthy mates, but they don't like knowing precisely how wealthy they are.
Girl math. Yes.
Okay. Let's talk some explanations. You just gave an explanation for this last phenomenon, and it could be correct. One general explanation for these puzzles is there is a social norm according to which you're not supposed to assert your status aside from particular situations. Like if you're in a job interview, you're supposed to be like, I'm great in these various ways. But generally, there's a norm against doing that kind of thing.
Right.
This goes back to our understanding of status as a way to coordinate groups. If people are constantly jockeying for status, it makes us all worse off. So if you're getting a surgery and there's a team of people performing the surgery, you don't want members of the team arguing over who's in charge of what aspect of the surgery and, who is giving orders and who's completing tasks. So there's this general understanding that, hey, man, we are all, we all function better and without strife when we're not always jockeying for status.
Yeah, that makes sense.
On an individual level, asserting your status can irritate people. People don't like to feel lower status. It could motivate retaliation. When you brag about something, you're basically saying, I'm better than you.
Right. It feels pretentious.
You post a picture of your brand new expensive Mercedes Benz and you say, hey, check out this great car I own. You're kind of saying, I have this, you don't, I'm cooler.
Yes.
And if you post a picture and you're like, I am beautiful, observe my beauty.
That's your caption.
Yeah. You're saying I'm prettier than you.
Yes.
And people hate feeling like they're lower status. Resentment towards high status others is a very powerful force. For instance, many people reflexively hate the rich. They want to claim that the rich are, responsible for all the world's problems. What drives this? It's complicated, but one main factor is envy. They want to be rich. They want to have the status that rich people have. They compare their status to these rich people and it makes them feel bad. And feeling resentment and anger towards whatever group is successful is very common. And as Yoda says, anger leads to hate and hate leads to suffering.
I've heard society say eat the rich multiple times.
This is a partial explanation for the impulse to eat the rich.
It seems like a call to action, less than an impulse.
Well, let's say one of these eat the richers won the lottery.
Right.
Okay. Would they donate all the money to charity because they're like, rich is bad? Actually, rich is bad. I don't think so.
Probably
I think they
not.
would all of a sudden discover it's actually okay for them to be rich.
You can eat the other rich people, but not me.
Yeah.
Specifically, I'm a good rich person.
So the standard strategy is grab as much status as possible while pretending you don't care about status.
Yes.
You display impressive things about yourself for others to see while implicitly claiming, oh, this has nothing to do with status, so nobody can get angry at you.
Yes. That makes sense, kind of. It's very it's a weird way that we do things, but it
Yes.
makes sense.
This helps us understand the logic of humble bragging. You want to grab as much status as possible, but not seem like that's what you're doing. So you implicitly claim there is some other motivation for your communication. One particularly common strategy is to phrase your humble brag as a complaint. So here's an example of a complaint humble brag from Twitter. This woman says, quote, I'm wearing a ponytail, rolled out of bed from a nap, at the bar with my guy, and guys are still hitting on me. Like, really? Question mark, question mark, end quote. So implicitly, this woman is claiming to be complaining, but we may deduce that this tweet is mostly motivated by pride. She wants to brag about how desirable she is.
She's in her ponytail. She just got out of bed and she's still hot.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
Another explanation that could help us understand these puzzles is the phenomenon of counter signaling. Counter signaling is when somebody who is high status doesn't try as hard to show off their status compared to someone who is medium status. To put it simply, cool people don't go around talking about how cool they are. And if they did, it would be try hard, it would be tacky.
It's like the saying money talks, but wealth whispers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here are some examples. In a classroom, some students want to show off how smart they are. They could do this by answering the teacher's questions. When the teacher asks a difficult question, A smart student raises their hand, correctly answers the question, and signals their intelligence. But what if the teacher asks an easy question? In this case, the smart student might not even bother raising their hand to answer, even though they know the answer. They are trying to communicate that they are so smart. It's obvious to everyone that, of course, they know the answer, so they're not even going to bother raising their hand.
They're not even gonna placate to that question. Too easy.
Right. They're counter signaling. They're putting forward less effort to show how smart they are as a way of distinguishing themselves from people who are only moderately smart, who would jump at the chance of answering this easy question.
Right.
You see examples of counter signaling in fashion. Let's say you go to an academic conference. Have you ever been to an academic conference?
I have not.
There's an expectation that you're going to dress professionally. If you're there, you're dressed casually, and you're a nobody, you look bad. You look like you don't even understand the social norms of academic conferences. So the fact that you're dressed casually makes you lower status. If you look at graduate students, who in this case are aspiring academics, they're not yet successful, you'll find that they dress the most formally. They want to distinguish themselves from the sorts of people who don't even understand the norms of professional attire. But if you look at the highest status scientists, they tend to dress more casually. And this casual dress is a way of communicating, you know who I am. You know I am high status in this subculture, and you would never confuse me for a low status person. So I can get away with dressing casually and still be high status.
So it's backwards a little bit.
Yeah, it's the highest status individuals putting forward less effort to display their status. And that's a way
Yeah.
of distinguishing themselves from people who are lower status who would have to emit those signals to show off their status.
Right.
Counter signaling helps us understand the bring your date to an ATM case. It also helps us understand dating dynamics in general. If you bring your date to an ATM, it's try hard. The most attractive people have a lot going for them. They don't have to invest a lot of effort convincing others how attractive they are.
Right.
So dating is this weird dance where you're trying to seem attractive, but also trying to seem like you're not trying to seem attractive.
Don't do too much in it.
Yes. Your dates might figure out that you're wealthy if you pick them up in a Lamborghini, but that's just the car you happen to own, right? You love cars and you appreciate the artistry of high-end vehicles, and strictly as a side effect, your date noticed that you're a wealthy person.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Another dating example would be texting, and this is coming more from a male perspective, but you want to seem interested in the person. You also want to seem witty and impressive, but you don't want to seem like you're desperate or trying too hard. So you don't want to text back too quickly or send messages that are too long, because then it's like you've thought about it too much. Right? It's like you care too much. So you want to be charming, but it's all just like an afterthought and you're not even trying to be charming.
Right. I think that's shared in like a female perspective as well, is especially not texting back very quickly because you don't want to
Hmm.
seem like they're the only person you're paying attention to.
Right, right.
Or, yeah,
Well, I think there's many more topics in psychology that we should pay attention to and perhaps even discuss at length.
there always are.
And we shall discuss said topics on the next episode of The Scientific Worldview.